Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome from St. Louis, Missouri, and the home of the Missouri Institute of Mental Health in our 50th anniversary year. My name is Tom Pansella with MIMH. I'm glad you took the time to join us today. We've got a nice crowd out there. I'll introduce our speakers to you in just a moment. If you're joining us and at any point would like to ask a question or submit a comment of any kind, I noticed a few of you have already found the chat window underneath the video screen. That's fantastic. Use that at any point during the presentation to submit your questions to us. We'll ask questions at the end of the presentation, but please don't feel like you have to wait to the end of the presentation to ask those questions. You'll see that there are several links below the video window as well. If you want to pop the speaker slides up in a separate window, it says Slides as PDF. You can click on that link and page through the slides on your own. There's also links to the Amazon site and the Facebook site where our speakers talk about their books, or you can purchase their books from them, and you can click on those links at any time. Also, if you're interested in CEUs for today's program, those are still only $10 per person. You can click on that link during the program or immediately following. We'll also send you all of those links in a follow-up email after the program. So again, we're glad you're joining us today. And I'd like to introduce Patrick Fleming and Sue Lauber Fleming. And Pat is a CSAT supervisor and psychotherapist practicing here in St. Louis. He's got his Master of Divinity degree and years of pastoral experience as a hospital chaplain and as a spiritual coach. His work has focused on integrating spirituality into psychological counseling with both sexual addicts and survivors of childhood abuse and trauma. In recent years, this has included treatment of clerical sexual abuse offenders and abusers. He is the principal co-author of two books, the one we're talking about today, and Broken Trust, Stories of Pain, Hope, and Healing from Clerical Abuse Survivors and Abusers. Sue is a psychotherapist and a personal coach, coincidentally also here in St. Louis. I guess that's probably a good thing. She's also a psychiatric nurse and has had extensive pastoral experience as a hospital chaplain and as a chaplain supervisor. She's been a consultant to several religious organizations in the St. Louis region. In her counseling work, she's centered on the psychological and spiritual healing process of women survivors of abuse of all kinds, especially those who are victims of clerical sexual abuse. She's, of course, co-authored both of the books that we talked about before, and she has told her own story of emotional and spiritual healing from childhood sexual abuse. And so now I would like to turn the program over to Pat and Sue. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks very much. We're very happy to be with you today. In our counseling practice, as Tom said, we've worked with hundreds of survivors of many types of abuse. We've especially focused on sexual abuse and clerical sexual abuse. And as Tom said, we've also worked for the last 10 years with clerical sex abusers. So from our clinical experience, we've developed the material that we'll present to you today. And from that experience, we've written, as Tom said, these two books. And we're going to focus primarily on the material from our newest book, Shattered Soul. In this presentation, what we'd like to do is to share with you an experience of the wounds of survivors, the spiritual wounds, which we sometimes also call soul wounds, and also to give you a little taste of a spiritual healing process for those soul wounds that we call the pathways to healing. We'll do this with ideas, stories, poetry, journal reflections, and at the end, a guided meditation. So we want this to be an experience and not just a content-laden presentation.
I myself am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse by a Catholic priest. A journal of my own healing is a part of our book, Shattered Soul. When I was only 4 years old, we lived in a teeny house, and the parish priest assaulted my mother and me. We lived alongside of the alleyway, and the school playground was right there also. One morning, while my dad was at work, my two older brothers were at school, my baby sister was taking a nap, my mother was downstairs in the basement doing laundry, and I was upstairs playing. And the pastor, being the landlord to our house, had a key. He came in our side entrance. and unbeknownst went down the stairs and sexually attacked my mother. I was upstairs, and hearing my mom's screams, I ran down the steps. What I saw and witnessed, no child should ever have to experience. My mother yelled and said, "Run up the steps." As I finally got my little legs to work, I went up the steps, and as I was going up the steps, the Monsignor grabbed my legs and molested me. I crawled upstairs and waited. My mother finally came upstairs carrying laundry, and very quietly, in silence, she fixed each of us a bowl of ice cream, and we folded clothes. To this day, when I am stressed, I find comfort in something sweet, especially ice cream.
So in all of our therapeutic work, and especially our work with survivors, we've always worked from a very holistic and dual vision of seeing and integrating in the therapy both the psychological or the psychosocial and the spiritual needs and experience of our clients. The double rainbow is our symbol for this work, for this double vision, because a double rainbow is one light refracted into two mirror images of each other, two rainbows that reflect and mirror each other. We think of this, the double rainbow, as standing for the dual needs of our clients, the psychological needs and the spiritual needs. In his recent book, Spontaneous Happiness, Dr. Andrew Weil proposes what he calls a biopsychosocial spiritual model of mental health treatment, which he calls integrative mental health. This is a good term for our approach to therapy in general, but especially to the spiritual healing processes for survivors that we're talking about today. When we work with our survivor clients, we generally focus first on the psychosocial healing process. And as we do so, we assess, though, and begin to integrate the spiritual part of the healing. And the very important point about that is this is only if this is something that the client is open to this and they want that to be part of the therapy. A key to this is that we discover and help our clients discover and employ their own spirituality, never our own spirituality. We learn the language, images, concepts, and rituals of their spirituality and help them to surface and access and heal their own spirituality. This is really a therapeutic and non-religious, yet really also a very spiritual process. We work with them from a viewpoint of universal spiritual concepts and approaches and experiences. Universal ideas such as the idea that everyone has a soul, and we want them to access the power of their soul. It's really in the same spirit as the 12-step program approach to spirituality, which they talk about a higher power as the person understands him or her. So it's their own spirituality. We do at times use some God language in this out of necessity, but only language that fits our clients, language that really reflects what they discover about their spirituality and what they believe. This integrative approach to therapy has led us to see the importance of identifying and treating the spiritual wounds caused by abuse and trauma, as well as the psychological wounds. And so we've developed a psycho-spiritual process to do this. Of course, it's important to say that this spiritual process and the spiritual focus is not meant to replace the psychological treatment in any way, but it's a part of an integrative, holistic approach to the healing of survivors from abuse and trauma.
Why is this healing process important? I'd like to share what we have learned. Untreated spiritual wounds will often block the psychological healing process. I have a full-length mirror in my office, and as the clients are leaving, I ask them to look into the mirror and tell them to see a beautiful woman of value. And immediately they sound like a motorboat. But. The rules from old are strong. Don't talk, don't trust, don't think, don't see and hear. Do what I say. Don't create without my okay, whoever my happens to be. The client is beginning to talk the talk, and at this time is unable to walk the walk. They look into the mirror and they see themselves as damaged goods. They see their painful, ugly feelings, whatever abuse or trauma they've experienced, and then they conclude, this is who I am. The old messages from verbal abuse, emotional abuse, are deeply embedded. The wall of shame is thick and heavy. The healing process is deeper and better grounded and more lasting if the spiritual wounds of abuse and trauma are also attended to. For many clients to be free, to live more fully, and utilize their spirituality, since abuse, as we will see, has often strangled, suppressed, or distorted their spirituality. This opens up a dimension of their life that empowers them to live with greater purpose, meaning, energy, and hope.
A further reason that we find the soul wounds or the spiritual wounds from abuse so important to address is for addicts. We often find that their spiritual part of their program, especially if they've used 12 steps to recovery, is often impeded or blocked or slowed if they don't address the spiritual wounds. So as they try to work the 12 steps, we also try to help them deal with the leftover wounds of their abuse, the spiritual part of that. To help clients start to access their healing process, we've developed a characteristic set of, or developed a picture or a framework of a characteristic set of frequently encountered spiritual wounds, which, as we've been calling them, the soul wounds. We've observed that these are present in survivors of all kinds of abuse: sexual, physical, verbal, emotional, and that they're even more prominent, for obvious reasons, where there has been religious abuse or where the perpetrator has been a member of the clergy. And this has been especially true where there is clerical sexual abuse. It has also been our observation that many of these spiritual issues and wounds are present in survivors of adult trauma as well, such as rape, violence, cult membership, or even natural disasters. All of these abuse or trauma-related experiences can create spiritual wounds.
One of the ways that we have described these spiritual wounds is what we call the spiritual laundry list. It's an adaptation of the adult children of alcoholics' psychological laundry list of psychological characteristics. I'd like to go over just a few of them. The first part of the spiritual laundry list is the problem of what we call the grease, the grit, and the grime. The spiritual characteristics are wounds of survivors of abuse and trauma, are dysfunctional families. 1, we have imaged our higher power, the God of our understanding, in a distorted way due to our childhood experience of our dysfunctional, addicted, or abusive parent or other significant other. We have come to believe that God is not faithful, that God is an unpredictable and untrustworthy as our wounded and abusive parent or other abuser. 3, our spirituality is grim and lacks hope, joy, or serenity. We find it difficult to be hopeful our trust in the gift of love available to us. 4, our spirituality is based on a sense of shame and unreasonable guilt and is dominated by shoulds. 5, we find it difficult to be grateful.
To help our clients access these spiritual wounds and to help us to identify them as well, we've developed a series of questions that we include at some point in the counseling with them. Sometimes the initial assessment, sometime later on when we begin to get into more spiritual kinds of issues. The slide shows all of these questions, and I'll just go over a few of them. We ask our clients, do you have a fear and shame-based spirituality based in shoulds and perfectionism? Do you have a felt belief that God's love is conditional and also that you don't meet those conditions? Do you have a limited or distorted image of God that results in a wounded, deformed, or distant relationship with God? Do you have an inability to be in the present moment due to emotional pain from the past and constant anxiety about the future? Do you have difficulty discovering meaning and purpose for your life? And finally, do you have a need for control based in the fear of spiritual surrender and of accepting your powerlessness over some things, many things in your life? So these are some questions we'll often use in the course of counseling, again, to help surface and identify the soul wounds. One of our clients in the book, the name we use for her is Becky, describes her own spiritual wounds in the following poem. She calls this poem "The Snow-White Clouds of Darkness." Sunlight dances on a crystal lake, reflecting bare, vulnerable trees. A bird flies to escape an unquenchable emptiness, and snow-white, spider-web clouds sail by quietly on frighteningly cold winds. It's all a mirror of my soul, empty, cold, and lonely. And I wonder if the artist is so busy painting this winter scene that he's blinded by the clouds and has lost sight of me. Perhaps he's forgotten. Perhaps I'm worth forgetting.
Fear and shame, even spiritual shame, underlie many of these spiritual wounds. This is my reflection of fear and shame from my own journal. As I said earlier, abuse for me equated with being seen and getting hurt. Finding courage then meant for me becoming visible. It meant breaking through the fear of being seen, noticed, or acknowledged. Overcoming the fear to receive, the fear to even say thank you, the fear to be liked, to be listened to be touched gently, to be appreciated, to be seen, and acknowledged as beautiful, to have my presence be enjoyed, to think for myself, to speak out loud, to know deep within that I have something worthwhile to contribute, to be heard, to share my woundedness, my weaknesses, even my successes. I feared being caught, seen as being deficient, or even being seen as excellent. I identified with Mr. Cellophane Man in the movie and Broadway musical Chicago, unseen and invisible, except that my fear led me to want to be that way. One of the most life-changing acts of courage that helped to break the power of my fear and shame was when I became a cheerleader in high school. Talk about becoming visible. It scared me to death, yet something inside me pushed me to try out. Something inside had to be seen and heard. Before I went to the tryout, I stopped by my parish church. I went inside and knelt before a statue of Our Lady. Again, in childlike faith, I told her and God how much I wanted to be a cheerleader. I asked for God's help to do well in the audition. I made it. I was one of 2 sophomores chosen. I was not in any in-group, but I had a strong pair of lungs and an ocean of energy and enthusiasm that had been hidden deep within, waiting for this opportunity to surge forth. I broke through my fear and became visible. My heretofore hidden talents began to emerge, a process that continues through much of my adult life. I discovered strengths and weaknesses and talents within me that I had never guessed were a part of me. Interestingly, priests and nuns often were the primary catalysts for my unfolding self-discovery and coming out party. The retreat director that helped me find my voice and my fit for leadership and planning. The pastor who asked me to found a mother's club for the parish school, even though, again, I was not a part of the usual social circles of the parish. A nun who encouraged me to volunteer to do pastoral care, our chaplaincy ministry, in her hospital. Wonderful work which evolved over time into my current professional career as a psychotherapist. God seemed to have a plan and a purpose for me. With God's help, I found the courage to make myself more and more visible, and bit by bit, I gradually weakened the vice-like grip of my fear and shame. I heard an inner voice urging me to step out of the shadows. My job has been to listen and to respond with courage, to grab onto whatever rope is offered to me, to pull myself past my fear and into the light. Sometimes still when I do public speaking, or when I am the master of ceremonies for the St. Louis Strutters, a senior professional dance troupe that performs all over the country, the fear of being visible returns for a time. I think, do I have the right to be in front of this audience? Do I have anything to say? Who do I think I am? I want to run and hide. In fact, this happens before almost all of the workshops that Pat and I present. Yet when I'm aware and see you, the audience, and begin to feel a warm connection with you in attendance, little by little something shifts in me. The fear evaporates, and I hear God whisper in a quiet voice, "You are my precious child. You are loved. You are good. You matter. You count. You are you. Celebrate you." Then the words begin to flow.
Hearing Sue's journal reflection, also Becky's poem, you can get sort of a flavor of some of the soul or spiritual wounds that abuse causes. There's the wounds of fear and shame, the words of feeling of total devaluement. In response to these spiritual wounds of survivors, we've developed a spiritual healing process that we call the 5 pathways. They provide a map for the healing process, a spiritual GPS, if you will, to help heal the wounds of abuse and restore the connection of the person to their soul. We'd like to go over all 5 of these briefly now and then focus on 2 of them in more depth later. The first pathway is the pathway of courage, spiritual courage. It's a process of finding ways to access the spiritual courage of your own soul to overcome fear and shame. It involves telling and retelling your story, moving from victim to survivor to spiritual thriver. As you retell your story, you can do it as a victim at first, then as a survivor, but it's especially important to help them to get to the place of being what we call a spiritual thriver. The second pathway is a pathway of holy anger. In this pathway, we help our survivors discover the sacred power of their anger as an antidote to shame, and anger as a soul empowerment to help them to rediscover and reclaim their spiritual self without becoming bitter or resentful. The third pathway is a pathway of grief. This is about naming and mourning the losses not only to them psychologically or physically, but also the losses to their spirituality. It's kind we see grief in this pathway as kind of like a spiritual retreat, a time in which their soul leads them through grief to a deeper connection to your soul and to your God. If you've ever been on a spiritual retreat, you know it's about going away and withdrawing within yourself, slowing yourself down, and spending time focused within and connecting with soul or with your God, often as a healing process. Well, this is actually what grief does, because it slows us down. It makes us go inward. The fourth pathway is the pathway of forgiveness. The pathway of forgiveness we see as a spiritual revolution, in a sense, because there is great healing power in forgiveness to help them to heal themselves, to heal their own objectification that abuse often causes, and to help them to rehumanize actually both themselves as a survivor and to rehumanize, in a sense, their perpetrator, the perpetrator of their abuse. The fifth pathway is the pathway of transformation. In this, we help the survivors discover that there are actually surprising spiritual gifts hidden in the abuse experience, gifts of new purpose, meaning, and service that they can discover and access and begin to live from.
In our book, the 5 pathways are described as a spiritual journey or pilgrimage from your woundedness to spiritual wholeness. The spiritual wholeness and healing that survivors can attain in their journey is described in the second part of the spiritual laundry list, the solution of the wash, the rinse, and the polish. By choosing the spiritual healing journey, we learn that we can live our lives in a more meaningful manner. We can learn to change our attitudes, habits, and old patterns, including our old patterns of relating to our higher power, to find serenity, purpose, and happiness. We accept that we are accepted by God. We accept that we are accepted and loved, not for what we do, simply because we are. We learn and experience the gift of being in the present moment, with our God and with God's creation. We recover a childlike sense of wonder, joy, and awe about the magnificence of ourselves and all of creation. We develop a grateful heart and live in thankfulness for the many gifts that we have been given and that surround us always. Our soul leads us to live in a new sense of purpose and mission that enhances and deepens our lives and the lives of all with whom we come in contact.
So now we'd like to look to more depth into 2 of the pathways, holy anger and forgiveness. Are you not aware, this quote from 1 Corinthians says, "Are you not aware that you are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him or her, for the temple of God is holy, and you are that temple." If it fits for the client, we sometimes use this biblical image of themselves as a sacred temple, and abuse as an attacking of the sacredness of that temple. Abuse is a way of trying to destroy the sacredness of the temple of who you are. And so we tell our survivor clients that anger can be holy. It can be holy and cleansing and powerfully soul restoring. We tell them that anger has a voice which needs to be spoken and heard. If it is a just anger, and eventually anger tempered with mercy and love, anger's voice can be the voice of God or the voice of their soul crying out against injustice and the profaning of their temple. If you join with God's anger or your soul's anger at the abuse, if you allow your anger to come forth, you begin to reclaim the sacredness of your personal temple, body, mind, and soul.
When you tap into your anger about the abuse and focus it on the abuser, you align your anger with God's. And with God's anger, you can shout to the heavens. Hear the voice of anger. I am God's precious child, a magnificent person of value. I am not bad, wrong, dirty, or defective. Rather, what you, the abuser, did to me was wrong, dirty, bad, and sick. I am innocent. The abuse was not my fault. You, the abuser, are responsible for what you did to me and for the painful wounds and suffering the abuse has caused me. You took advantage of my vulnerability, my innocence, and my trust to overpower me and exploit me. I now reclaim my personal power to take charge of my body, my heart, my mind, and my soul. You made me feel worthless, desecrated, of no value. With my holy anger and God's, I drive you out and reclaim the sacredness and eternal and ultimate value of who I am and who I was created to be. I reclaim the holy temple of God that I am in my true self, the sanctuary of my soul.
The voice of holy anger. You can also hear this voice of anger and feel the soul-empowering characteristic of that anger in these words from a client that we'll call Helen. 27 years ago, you raped 2 children, your daughter and me. Evil triumphed that day in your heart, and we were its victims. I used to want you to suffer a miserable life, but now I just want to live with the satisfaction of knowing I conquered evil. I conquered you. The promise I made to stay angry, to never forget, to never forgive, perhaps served a purpose for self-preservation. At this point, though, I'm not sure what purpose the anger serves other than to keep you always in my life.
This is an excerpt from my journal. I am a recovering rageaholic. Early in my adult life, I was a true rageaholic, as my adult children can sadly testify. The rage was not so much directly from my abuse by Monsignor, but at myself for allowing abuse in various forms to continue into my adult life. By being silent and not having a voice. I have come to firmly believe in what I truly believe is an absolute spiritual law. God's love brings up anything unlike itself for the purpose of healing. God was surfacing the anger for my healing. In time, in my early 40s, I was able to transform the anger into a primal scream when I was alone in the house. I would scream not at God or any individual, and eventually not at myself. I screamed from some very deep well of hurt and rage at all the abuse that I had allowed in my life. I would scream at the top of my lungs, turning myself inside out, refinishing my inner guts and spirit, all the way down to my soul, sanding myself hard to remove all of the gunk that had accumulated inside me. This was an amazing cleansing. My screams brought up all my fury from my past and from all the abuse that I had permitted to occur in the present. They gave voice to all that had been unsaid and kept silent out of fear, because I believed that I didn't deserve to have a voice. God's love was working through my private, primal raging, screams to heal me and set me free. Gradually, the screaming subsided. There was no longer a need to scream. I felt lighter. I felt alive, and for the first time in a long time, grateful to be alive. I now had room for joy. I had space and openness to receive love and acknowledgement. I could now fully see the many blessings in my life, and they were and are many. And I am more deeply grateful. I was freer to let go and let God. I also had the energy to change the things in my life that were unhealthy, even abusive, and change them I did. With God's help, I live a joyous and abuse-free life today. When I get angry now, it's not from some hidden and deep tank of rage. It is anger that I can channel and harness for good. It is anger about some wrong in the present that I believe God wants to remedy. What angers me most today is when I experience being invisible to someone, but even more so when someone else is being treated invisibly or abusively, or when people are making unilateral decisions for me or other people. I am angered when anyone is not treated as the magnificent person of value that he or she most certainly is held to be by our God.
The pathway of forgiveness, which I'd like to look at next, is, for many of our survivor clients, the most difficult pathway, but also one of the pathways that is most powerfully liberating and healing from their soul wounds. To forgive is to set the prisoner free and to discover that that prisoner was you. What our survivors experience is that if their anger is very powerful and important at one phase of their healing, but if they do not start to move to and through and towards forgiveness, they can be trapped by that anger, and they can be imprisoned by it. What they also discover is what this next quote from our book says. That is that forgiveness is first of all for you, the survivor. Forgiveness is primarily and first for the forgiver. Forgiveness is only secondary for your abuser, because the purpose of forgiveness is to set your soul free from the effects of abuse, to let it fly and to soar. So we experience that forgiveness is a very difficult, but it's a very vital part of the spiritual healing journey for survivors. It's really important to talk of this as a process. It's a process and a journey that takes time and lots of soul work to achieve. It often takes actually a great deal of time. It's a process that can never be rushed. It's real important that survivors understand, and we help them to understand, that it's not a single decision. It's not a quick moment of saying, yes, I forgive. It's an ongoing process, often of forgiving little bit by little bit by little bit. It's also, again, important to emphasize that forgiveness is for them, for the survivor. It's really not primarily for your abuser. It's not, you don't forgive for the offender, really. You forgive to heal and free yourself. It's very important that they do that so that they can free themselves from any lingering anger that can really turn to bitterness or to staying stuck in a victimhood state. Forgiveness in this understanding is self and soul empowering. It's also important to say what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is never excusing or condoning the abuse that was perpetrated on you. It is not about giving power back or relinquishing your power to your perpetrator, to anybody else who might be abusive. It is not either about necessarily restoring the relationship with your abuser. It is about setting yourself free and empowering your soul and your deeper self to be freer and to be able to live your life from that soul, deep self. One of our clients, we'll call her Helen, captures both the difficulty of forgiving abuse and the powerful gift that it became for her when she writes this letter to her abuser. That day you abused my body, but only bruised my spirit. The bruises do and did heal. It took time, but they have healed, at least all but one small one that is left. I've been told that forgiveness is the last step to healing that last bruise. I have known for a while that this day was coming. I am struggling with this concept of forgiving a person who hurt me in so many ways. I don't know how to forgive, but if it is going to lead me to the freedom to love and the ability to be a better minister, then I will try. I have come too far in this healing process not to consider forgiving you. Evil conquered your heart that day, but it does not have to conquer mine today.
I'd like to share an excerpt from my journal. All healing is a process. The forgiveness part of healing is a process as well. God's love brings up anything unlike itself for the purpose of healing. This comes in God's time when the moment is fully ripe for healing and forgiveness. I had an unusual experience of this just about a year and a half ago. I was speaking at a workshop with Pat and Vicki, and we were doing it in San Francisco on these very pathways. We were presenting to a national conference of victim assistance coordinators, a wonderful group of people dedicated to aid in the healing process of victims of abuse by Catholic clergy. I was standing at the podium speaking about the healing power of forgiveness when I suddenly experienced a strange sensation in my body and then a fleeting picture of my mother being sexually assaulted by Monsignor. I have learned to listen to my body and to honor the sacredness of these experiences. I listened to what was happening within me while continuing to present the planned material. Then it really hit me. I had never actually forgiven the priest for molesting my mom and me, and for the horrendous toll the effects of my mom's abuse took on our family. And here I was talking on forgiveness. I stopped my talk. I took a few deep breaths and shared with the audience what was going on within me at that very moment. This broke all my fear and all my fear rules, because in doing so, I allowed myself to be visible and to have a voice. I acknowledged to the group that I had not yet forgiven Monsignor, and then chose right there and then to forgive him with the group of 60 or so people as my witnesses. I felt a momentary wave of release and lightness and was ready to go on with my part of the workshop. When I reflected on this experience later, I realized that I had probably been ready to forgive Monsignor for some time. It was sitting on the shelf, so to speak. I had just not picked it up and looked at it until that moment in time. This choice to forgive Monsignor was the last major piece of the puzzle of my healing process. Much healing had already occurred, and now this piece freed me further to lay the past to rest and be mostly done with it. A large part of what brought me to this point of forgiveness was my therapeutic work and personal experience with the priest and brothers of the residential recovery program, where Pat and I provide counseling. Listening was sacred listening to their sacred stories of their own abuse and hearing their commitment to healing and recovery for themselves and for their victims had opened my heart, my mind, and my soul to a new vision of perpetrators of abuse. I could see the woundedness that had spawned their abusive behavior. I could see the sickness and suffering that was behind their abusive actions. I could see their desire to be spiritually free and whole. What they wanted was the same thing that I wanted for myself and for all of my other clients who had been abused. This experience with these men had led me to wonder about Monsignor's sacred story. What abuse or other trauma had led him to do the awful things that he did to my mother and me? What sickness had created these behaviors? He clearly had suffered from alcoholism. What great pain he must have been in with this sickness, and with whatever sexual sickness he was also gripped by. What did he feel in his lucid moments when he realized what he and his priesthood had come to? How awful it must have been for him to be so out of control and to be living in such total contradiction to his calling. Hearing the stories of the men that we counsel had revealed to me the inner world of intense suffering that many perpetrators experience at the core of their intense and out-of-control sickness. This had led me to see Monsignor with a spiritual 20/20 vision that had opened my heart to forgive him that day in San Francisco. Sadly, I very much doubt that Monsignor ever got any help, care, or healing from his sickness as a perpetrator. Tragically, his life parallels my mother's life. Neither ever received the healing help that could have set them free.
So listening to Sue's reflection and about her experience of forgiveness, as well as Helen's letter to her abuser about forgiving, you can get some sense of the power of healing and liberation that the forgiveness pathway brings to survivors in freeing them from their soul wounds. One of our colleagues here in St. Louis who uses our book with her clients tells them that if you only read one section of the book, if you only have time for one of the parts of the book, focus on the forgiveness part, because it will be perhaps the most liberating for you. We'd like to end this part of the presentation before we get to your questions with a guided meditation from our book. This is a meditation for clients who have been working on the forgiveness pathway for a while and have become fairly advanced in that pathway. We call it the mountain meditation, or also the walking meditation.
I invite you to begin by closing your eyes and being aware of your breathing. Just notice as you breathe in and breathe out. Roll your shoulders back a little bit. Maybe you need to wiggle back and forth. Just get comfortable in your chair. Picture yourself stepping into a beautiful beach scene. See the waves. Feel the sand on your feet. The warmth of the sun. The brilliant color and vastness of the ocean. The wind softly brushing your skin. Hear the crash and the whoosh of the surf. Turn around now and face away from the sea. Looking down, you see a backpack. In it is your anger at your abuse or trauma and your abuser. Anger that is holy and that once served to empower and free you, and now weighs you down, confines and constrains your soul and saps your spirit. You reluctantly pick it up and put it on your back. Notice how it feels to be carrying your anger. Along with your anger, place in your backpack any willingness to be willing that you can now feel to begin to let go of your anger and forgive. You see in front of you, past the beach, a beautiful forest. There's a trail leading to it. See yourself walking along the trail into the forest. Notice the trees and the branches. Appreciate the coolness of the shade and the light. There are friendly animals in the forest. Stop if you choose, and for a moment talk to one of the animals. They're very friendly. Enjoy your conversation and remember it. Time to move on. You reach the edge of the forest and see an open meadow filled with wildflowers. They are so colorful. The trail leads you down through the meadow to a clearing. There's a flowing stream Listen as it ripples over the rocks and under the footbridge. The stream has many beautiful objects and creatures in and around it. Stop for a moment to enjoy the light sparkling and dancing on the water, shining like diamonds. Now look up from the bridge and see a glistening mountain in the sunlight before you. Your trail leads you over the bridge, and you begin to climb the mountain. You climb through and above the clouds, above timberline, to the top of the peak. Look around you at the glory of the creation. Then you notice a large flat boulder to sit on and rest. Take off your backpack and unload your anger from it. From the other side of the peak, a figure appears to be with you. This figure can be anyone that your soul imagines for you. A spiritual being, God, a lost loved one, a soul friend, some deeper part of yourself, or your soul itself. This person will be your guide and confidant during this time. You can discuss whatever you want. Be sure, though, to give the person your anger and to ask for the gift of forgiveness. Let the Spirit and your soul lead you wherever you need to go with the spiritual person, and share whatever you need to share. Let's be silent for the next few moments. After spending some time on the boulder with the spiritual being, you will notice that there is a figure off in the distance who is on a separate trail from the one that you took ascending the mountain. It is your abuser. Do not be afraid. You are safe. Your abuser's path is different than yours, and a large chasm lies between the two trails. Eventually you notice that your abuser is sitting on a rock below you, again at a safe distance on the other side of a deep canyon. Your abuser cannot see you. Only you and the spiritual being can see your abuser. Contemplating the scene, be aware of what you feel deep inside as you behold your abuser. How does your soul view this encounter with your abuser? How does the spiritual being look upon your abuser? If you need to, again express your anger at your abuser. Hear the spiritual being voice anger at the abuser. Notice how you feel. If you are ready, with the help of the spiritual being, communicate your forgiveness or your desire, your willingness to be willing to forgive your abuser across the safe space of the canyon that separates you. Notice how you feel. Your abuser now leaves the rock below you and descends the mountain again by a different path. Your abuser walks around a bend in the trail and disappears. You know that he is gone from your holy mountain, and you are safe. Notice how you feel now towards your abuser. When you are ready to leave, thank and say goodbye to the spiritual being. Remember what he or she said to you. Slowly hike down the mountain, noticing the light, being aware of the freshness of the air, the sounds as you cross over the bridge of the rippling stream, walking through the meadow, all those beautiful wildflowers, through the forest, and then you see the beach and walk to the edge of the vast ocean. Hear that whoosh of the waves and the sounds of the seagulls. Notice your breathing. As you breathe in and you breathe out, know that you are safe, and very gently open your eyes.
right, we do have a couple of questions that have come in. We thank everyone for joining us so far today, and you can still submit questions using the chat feature underneath the video window. First question that came in asks how you explain how to forgive.
That's a great question.
It's a great question, a difficult question. I think partially because it's very individualized. It will be a somewhat different process for different people. But a few things, I guess, I would say, and see what you want to add, Sue, is that, well, first of all, it's really important that the people let themselves have their anger. Sometimes people rush to false forgiveness and do not allow themselves first to be angry. So after they've been able to really process their anger for a while and perhaps release it with letters and journaling or physical action, then I think that they often need to go through the grief pathway next. But as they move on to mourn what they've lost, but as they move on to the forgiveness, it might begin to involve what parts of it can they forgive? Can they begin to really see that if they hold on to their anger in this or that way, that it's hurting them? It's real important that they realize that it's not about losing their power when they forgive it. In fact, it gives them greater power. A major part of it that we sometimes work on is helping them to, as Sue talked about in her reflection, helping them to really maybe understand and see or know something about their perpetrator, their abuser's story. Where did this abuse come from? Because we've learned from working with both perpetrators and abuse that there's always a story. There's always some place where the abuse came from. Doing that, learning their story, can really be a part of what helps them to start to release their anger and to forgive. Do you want to add anything, Sue?
Yeah. And in forgiving, I think it's real important to remember that you're not condoning, agreeing, encouraging horrific actions of abuse and trauma. But you look at having the willingness to be willing. There's no action there. The willingness to be willing to let go. And if you're holding on to anger and resentment, just do that for a moment, and it hurts. It hurts my body. And the more I might choose to let go, notice I'm just going finger by finger, and maybe my thumbs and wiggling a little bit. I've still got very stiff, resentful, angry arms. So it's a process. You don't have to rush it.
Thank you. Person has a client that's currently very hurt from past experience, and the last thing that the client wants to do is to forgive. How do you even begin to plant the seed of forgiveness in someone who is so against doing so? I did that without my microphone. I'm going to do that again for the benefit of the audience. Client is very hurt from past experience, and the last thing the client wants to do is to forgive. How do you even begin to plant the seed of forgiveness in someone who is against doing so?
I'm seeing a picture of a tight rosebud, and I would so much like it to be in bloom for my party on Saturday night. And it's like this. And if I go and try and open that, I'm not going to have a blossom. It may or may not open by Saturday night. So I believe it's something very deep inside the individual. It certainly was for me. And nobody was going to pry that open. No one was going to push me or make me or move me. It was my interior work with the God of my understanding that very gently, softly, kind of unbeknownst to me, helped with warmth and love to start opening that bud that I could even think about being willing to forgive.
I'd also add that you really help them to see that, as Sue said, first of all, that they have time. It's their process. There is no hurry. Okay? It's also their choice. They may choose not to forgive. However, you can begin to help them to see what holding on to the anger may be doing to them. For instance, one of the things I see with some clients is that what keeps some clients in sort of a perpetual victimhood state of mind and mentality is if they hold on to their anger. And if you can help them to see what that's doing to them, and that forgiveness as a gradual process will help to free them from that, that'll begin to plant the seeds.
All right, I got two more. How do you know when a client's ready to begin the pathways? What if they're still in fear of the abuser, although they are currently safe?
Fear of the abuser.
So,
Tell their story.
Yeah. First of all, I would explore with them what their story is, and maybe perhaps have them retell their story in different ways. First, from the viewpoint of a victim, then survivor, then what we call spiritual thriver. That will often tell you where they are in their healing process. It will tell them are they ready for, are they still need to be in the courage pathway, or are they ready to move into the anger pathway? Are they ready, or do they need to grieve? So I think listening to the client, to their story, to where they are, tells you, are they ready to forgive? Do they still need to grieve? Do they still need to be angry?
And finally, what if the abused is not religious? How can we use these methods to assist them?
Would you repeat that?
What if the abused is not religious? How can we use these methods to assist them?
Well, actually, what we find is that you can use these methods with all kinds of abuse. A lot of what we're saying here is that all kinds of abuse, and even adult trauma, not only causes psychological wounds, emotional wounds, but it causes spiritual wounds. And not just religious abuse, or not just abuse by a religious figure, like clerical sexual abuse, causes these spiritual wounds. So it's really something that can be used with a survivor of any kind of abuse. Again, not every, as we said at the beginning, not every client is going to want to pursue the spiritual part of their healing. If that's not a part of their life, that's not a part of their belief system, then we completely respect that and don't talk about the soul or spiritual belief system. Soul or spiritual wounds. So it really is something, though, that can be used for any kind of abuse.
And that mirrors the philosophy of the 12-step recovery program, where it is not a religious program. It's billions and billions and billions have found recovery through the 12 steps.
All right, and with that, we will wrap things up for this afternoon. And thank you, folks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you got a lot from today's presentation. The links will stay active at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll also send them to you in a follow-up email. Links to purchasing the book, links to purchasing CEUs, as well as links to your website. If you're interested also, if you're anywhere near Missouri, we've got the Spring Training Institute coming up in the spring. The information has come online for that. That's also available through our website. We encourage you to join our email list. If you've given us your email list today, we'll be adding you to our email list and encouraging you to have your friends and colleagues join that as well. And also our next program is coming up on November the 8th. Information about that is on our website as well. So I thank you for your time today.
Thank
Pat,
you, Tom.
Sue, thank you so much for your time and
Thank
your
you very
expertise
much.
today.